The Lord be with you. Almighty God, who through your only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, overcame death and opened to us the gate of everlasting life, grant that we who celebrate with joy the day of the Lord's resurrection may be raised from the death of sin by your life-giving Spirit. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. Okay, so this is the kitchen sink class. This is where you put all the extra stuff at the end, that we're going to throw in there. I'm going to point to a couple things we're going to do so you can be thinking about them. One, we're going to do a quick recap of the class. We're also then going to have a short discussion about what we would like said about us at our funeral reception, because there's a point I'm going to make with that. We're going to talk a little bit about death and life, and in that also I'm going to ask, I realize that this class has been very receptive. You hear things, there's been questions, but not a lot of times for you to speak. We're going to give an opportunity for people, if they want to share something they have learned in the process of dying, whether that's when taking care of somebody else or some encounter they've had, something they learned, something they wish that they had known before they encountered that. But if you do that, it has to be short. I'm talking like a minute short. Y'all catch me? Minute? Everybody? Minute? All right, good. We're going to talk a little bit about the theology of salvation, which is a good way to wrap it up. And then we also want to hear from y'all on things we could do to make this class better, because it's our plan to do this every 4 years or so, just because new group of people, and we just have found that there's a need for this kind of discussion. So if you have ideas for things in the future, I'd love to hear them. Now, but we're going to start a little differently. Member of our church, Doug Halverson, is a retired priest, but he had a different sort of career than a lot of priests in that he did not primarily work in churches. It's kind of how God led him into a weird roundabout. Listening to the story of how he ended up doing all this stuff is fascinating and will take you an entire lunch to get through it. It's just a lot of things kind of God directed him in different ways. And long story short, he ended up being the director of a retirement community, which is, I think, he can tell you more about what it is and how it was, but in our community, it'd be more like Azalea Trace. In fact, Axe, which owns Azalea Trace, ended up merging with y'all's, so they're the same kind of ish thing. And I asked him if he would come speak to us about questions about care and different opportunities we have for the kind of care we need as we're approaching the end of life. Because he is not only insightful in a lot of things and has become a good friend, he also happens to be an expert in this particular field. So Doug, I invite you forward.
Good morning, all.
Good morning. Good morning.
I want to thank Katie and Michael for giving me this opportunity, for allowing me to share some things with you.
Just point it that way.
There we go, cool. I'm a non-parochial priest, canonically resident in the Diocese of New Jersey. I am now licensed in this diocese since Sherry and I moved here 3 years ago. I retired in 2018 as CEO of the Evergreens, which is a continuing care retirement community. In my retirement, we merged with Axe, which is, as you all know, Azalea Trace. Until I retired, I was licensed in I collected licenses. My kids said I had an ego wall. I was licensed in New Jersey as a nursing home administrator, a marriage and family therapist, and a clinical social worker. Now, a confession. I know absolutely nothing about Florida rules and regs. They vary state to state, and we'll talk about that a bit. My experience with rules and regs is primarily New Jersey, but also Indiana, where I was a chief clinical officer for a managed care company. An odd career. The extraordinary presentations we've had for the past several weeks on end-of-life issues have focused heavily on dying in your own private home or in an extended, short-term hospice or in an acute care hospital. how might things be different in dying in some kind of supported senior living? Because it's going to be very different. And what do I mean by supported senior living? I'm going to give you a whole laundry list of types of contexts. Assisted living, skilled nursing, long-term care, residential care, memory care, integrated settings like CCRCs or life plan communities, which would be like ACTs. I want to give some bullet points and some examples. Some of the examples are not wonderful. I mean, they're not happy, but in fact, they're real. A topic for another day is the challenging process of deciding when, why, and where to move from one's independent home to some kind of senior living. That's another whole topic. Now, first of all, let's start out with the trade-off. There is a very significant trade-off. Living and dying in one's private home keeps the patient largely in control unless adjudicated incompetent, but puts responsibility for care and attendant stress on family and friends. Living and dying in a senior living context, a facility, trades varying degrees of control for significantly increased support, care, resources, and attendant reduction in responsibility and stress on family and friends. State and federal regs may trump individual choice. Let's start out with a tough one. We had a 105-year-old travel agent who had been to, her goal in life was to be to at least one country for her every year of her life. So when she finally passed, she had been to 115 countries, and she was only 105 years old. She wanted to be in hospice, but she wanted her hospice to be in our assisted living. New Jersey, in its infinite wisdom, said you had to do it in skilled nursing. One of my delights in life is that I was too old for contact sports, but I loved fighting with the state. And it became a hobby. And in New Jersey, fighting with the state was called independent, wait a minute, IDR, informal dispute resolution, anything but informal. You couldn't show up with your attorney, but you could, in fact, the state always had an attorney. So I got him. I hired an HR director who was an attorney. So she, of course, had to go along. But anyway, this patient decided that she was going to die in assisted living, not in skilled nursing. She was in skilled nursing, in assisted living and hospice for almost a year and a half. The state would continuously fight with us because that's too long to be on a hospice. She would be in her room, laying in her bed with the door open, and she observed all of life, and she kind of was the mother of spirit of the whole unit. And she would comment on you as you walked by. One day, I met her daughter in the hallway, and she said, well, Mom's going to die. She's decided. The lady died that week. But the reason I point this out is that the facility had to be required to file and with the state support reports on a variety of kinds of things because we were frankly flying in the face of rules and regs. Another similar situation, well, not similar, but also requiring me to fight with the state. We had a resident in skilled nursing who had a DNR, do not resuscitate, and a DNH, do not hospitalize. It was very clear, he was competent, it was absolutely clear. Every time he had any kind of an event, his son would come in, close the door to his room, and fight with him. And the screaming and hollering was crazy. And then the father would say, okay, and he'd give up and he'd go into the hospital. That's the last thing this man wanted. This went on long enough that we had to file with the state on that. Under difficult, conflicting circumstances, the facility may have to file with the state for some, and which could result in some kind of a state audit. But the state came in and the son had to stand down. But I felt so bad for the father because he was, getting screamed at and name called just because he wanted to go to the hospital. Didn't want to go to the hospital. Next bullet point, have multiple executed copies of significant documents such as your DNR and your DNH in locations accessible to designated decision makers and emergency services. Now, I'm not an attorney. I've spent a lot of time and a lot of budget with attorneys, but I'm not an attorney, but I would say have multiple copies. Why? Okay. what are emergency services trained to do?
Save your life.
Save your life, right, whether you wanted to or not, all right? Well, I would suggest that you would have your DNR and DNH executed, legally executed, in an envelope magneted to your kitchen, your refrigerator door, so that when the emergency services came in, they would be warned ahead of time that that was available to them and they needed to honor it. You need to have it legally executed. Don't just have one of these wristbands that say, when in doubt, buy me a beer or something, whatever they say, you know.
Nor have it on your cell phone either.
No, don't. You can have it duplicative, but always have it available for the emergency service when they come in to grab it. And it needs to be easy and accessible. Integrate your power of attorney and medical proxy into one local person with a valid backup. I stress that. We had an 82-year-old resident whose POA and POA and medical proxy were an 85-year-old resident of another nursing home. Now, this is called an IQ test that was failed. Because whenever she needed anything legally done, she had to assume, hope, pray that her POA, her medical proxy was in good enough shape that day to do something. You know, that's just not good. Ensure that your chosen context will honor your DNR and DNH. Why do I stress that? This is especially important if you're moving into a facility under a religious sponsorship. Some Roman Catholic and some Jewish facilities will not honor end of life. They will require you to get care, whether you want it or not, and you need to know that coming into it. In most states, so-called Kevorkian wishes are neither honored nor legal. You need to know where you are. One of the reasons that's really important here is that though this is Florida, how far are we from Alabama? Some of you may have family that are in Alabama. They may be in institutions, facilities in Alabama. They may be in Mississippi. They may be in Georgia. When my operation was in Moorestown, New Jersey, right across the river from Philadelphia, we always had to be very clear on what was going on in Pennsylvania, because we were half hour from Pennsylvania, 40 minutes from some other facilities. Know what the facility will limit or allow how they will limit or allow visitations during contagions. Some of you may know, I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands, but some of you may know some horror stories during COVID about folks who were prevented from visiting their loved one while they died, because that was the policy. There are ways to handle contagions that don't require that level of shutdown. However, people anymore are so concerned about lawsuits that they tend to overreact sometimes to some of these things. Know what the facility's requirements are. Under normal circumstances, find out how much latitude your family will have in assisting the patient. My father and mother were both residents of the Evergreens. My mother was post-stroke, Parkinson's. She had to share that with me, of course. Post-stroke and Parkinson's, and she had fractured a hip and was not able to maneuver on her own. My father would pick her up. He lived in the independent living. She was in skilled nursing. He would pick her up in her wheelchair and take her around town in Moorestown. Well, we were fine with that as a facility for a while until I realized that he was crossing a very busy street and frankly just kind of crossed the street. Didn't pay much attention to traffic, and that was not something we could really tolerate. So what will be the ability of your family member to assist in the care? An ugly topic. Beware of funding sources. Now, Medicare is federal. Medicaid varies state to state. Skilled nursing is heavily influenced by Medicare, so it is heavily influenced by the feds. Many states do not have formal assisted living regs. So assisted living can vary radically state to state. In some states, assisted living is actually called residential health care. So know what the funding mechanisms are. Know your facility's policies and practices regarding patient financial shortfalls What level of financial disclosure is required, and what are the responsibilities of family members, if any, to cover shortfalls? Let me give you 2 examples. Had a resident come in, declared $9 million at admission. 5 years later, her family came in and said she was broke. Now that's a bit of accounting that's kind of creative. They wanted her to go on our charity care. We had a very robust charity care program. I could not allow that, given the fact that $9 million in 5 years was not something that she could have anywhere come close to spending herself. It was clear what had happened. When we refused that, the family took her out of our community and took her to another. So be real clear on what the implications are of financial disclosure. When you disclose financially at any application, don't fudge it. I did have one resident who declared $75 million, and he said, "That's enough, you don't need to know anymore." I aspired to be that resident. SNF, skilled nursing regulations, are heavily influenced by Medicare and as I said, federal rules. So what are the facility's admissions, financial coverage, and involuntary discharge policies? Know those clearly before you go in. There have been a number of horror stories in the U.S. right now because standalone skilled nursing facilities are not doing well. The cost of running them is crazy. And you've probably read of some skilled nursing facilities, standalone, that closed, some of them with extremely short notice, and residents were, deposited elsewhere. Know what the involuntary discharge regulations are. Know what facility admissions are and financial disclosure. One of the things that I love, if it's available, is to look at communities that have CARF accreditation. Why CARF? Because they not only do quality of care evaluation, they also do financial viability. And that is so huge right now. Standalone facilities are in trouble, and even some small boutique facilities are needing to merge, like with ACTS. ACTS is now, this is not an endorsement of ACTS, just giving you they are the second largest not-for-profit owner of assisted living, skilled nursing, so-called CCRCs in the country.
Doug,
Yes.
what is CARF?
CARF is the Commission on the Accreditation of Rehab Facilities. You will find that with some hospitals that'll have Joint Commission and CARF. Some places will only have CARF. I've had to go through Joint Commission and CARF on several different jobs. It's pretty rigorous financial disclosure and quality of care. How much latitude will you have in choosing an outside care provider? You've got a doc that's been your favorite doc, GP, for 30 years. Can you still use that doc when you move into some kind of senior living facility? That doc may be so intimately aware of your end-of-life issues, and you may not just want to have to break it down to with a new doc. Find out what their policies are in limiting access. Absolutely, without regard for your current excellent physical health, clearly designate in writing, file with the facility, and file with whomever you want, your preferred funeral home. My brother and I and his wife were in Banff, kind of the last leg of civilization in Canada. My mother died in the Evergreens. My father was a resident there, but he was severely disabled with Alzheimer's. My next geographically close relative was in Ohio, and all the others were much farther away than that. The bottom line is she had designated very clearly her preferred funeral home, and so she had the dignity of being removed from her skilled nursing room where she died to the funeral home, and it worked very well. We got back from Banff in good order, but she wasn't lying there in her bed while the facility tried to figure out who was going to come pick her up. That can be pretty ugly. What's on your minds? I can babble on too long.
I'd like to say a word about the Ombudsman's Committee in the state of Florida.
Huh.
When a family has concern about how their loved one is being treated in a skilled nursing or long-term care facility, i.e. nursing home, they can contact the Ombudsman's Committee, and then a group will go, usually a pair, two people, and investigate. It's not always the solution, but in many cases, it's very, very helpful.
It's a good point. I think you also need to know that not everybody knows what ombudsman is. I showed up at a medical facility here when Sherry and I first moved in, had a bit of a challenge, asked for their ombuds statement, and the receptionist said, "What?" I said, "You know, the one for contacting anybody in the state about care?" Be real clear that any language you use, one of the problems with healthcare, it's like the military. They've got their own acronyms. It's like medical care. They've got their own acronyms. They've got their own all kinds of designations. Make sure you understand. Don't be afraid to ask what that means. What does ombudsman mean? What does DNH mean? Make sure you ask those early. Other questions?
I got one. So, by the way, he did not offer this. I'm going to offer it to you. If you have questions about this afterwards, you can call Doug, and I'm sure. And if you offer to pay
I
for
came
lunch,
with business cards,
I'm
but I don't have
sure-
a job.
Because what he just mentioned, he said, watch for this, watch for this, watch for this, watch for this. He's pointing to the complexity of this reality.
Yeah.
But here's the point I want to say. Because it is a complex thing, it is hard to do on the fly. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You have an immediate need, and you have to figure it out now. How do you do it? What's the right thing? So what advice would you give to people? I know, because I'm going to say something about the when in just a second, but I know we're not really talking about when you need to make what decisions, but what's the recommendation for how we can prepare
Yeah.
and not just react?
Good point. So probably the most important thing of the day. I've got Parkinson's. When we moved here, we thought we were looking for a particular kind of housing unit. Elevator, a mews, 3 stories. We found them, but they weren't on the market. We ended up buying a single family, which is not what we really wanted, but a single family, 1 floor. We looked around the area very carefully, very clearly when we came here, so we would know what the options were when I start to get gaga and drooling and all. So the bottom line is, know your resources. If you're in an area that you think you're going to be in for a while, look around. Go visit ACTS. Go visit the arbors. Go visit anybody. Ask questions. If you don't like the answers, move on. But do not assume that when the balloon goes up, that you or your family members or designated assistants are going to have the wisdom, the time, the energy, the stamina to make decisions on short notice.
Perfect. So now from the priest perspective, I'll tell you this. I am regularly talking with the children of members of our church who are realizing that their parents are in a situation that is untenable. Have any of y'all ever been in that position where you were worried about your parents and the situation that they were in? Okay. Now here's the hard thing. We're all going to get there too. Someday Garrett and Zoe are going to be like, Dad thinks he can still drive, but he can't drive anymore. Right? Let's be honest, because that's the truth. Right? So if that's the case, we need to start, there is a planning piece to this about what kind of level of care do we need and what we will do at different stages. And some people make a plan where they do home care. Awesome. Amy's grandmother turned 99 yesterday. She has had some severe dementia now at this stage, physically strong as a rock. Her family has the resources. They came up with a plan. She has round-the-clock people at her house. That's how she wants to do it. That's what they did. It works for them. Aunt and uncle live close by, they can help with certain things, everything else is done by the caregiver, it works. They made a plan, they're working the plan. Not everybody has that, either the resources or the family nearby or whatever, to figure that out. But here's what I'm going to tell you. My experience has been, while I have not had to do this myself, I've now been a priest 17 plus years. Not an expert, but I've been around it. Bob and John may be able to say more about this. I have found that when people make transitions in their life to whatever that plan is, sooner than they need it, their adjustment is substantially better than it is until they wait until the last minute, well, oh my gosh, we have to do this today. Bob is giving me the thumbs up, right? So if you're coming out of the hospital and going into a rehab facility that you're going to then be in for a long time, it's way different than if you had set up a plan and got into a place where you still had the ability to feel connected and figure things out on the front end and then get hospitalized and come back in. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I find that people wait too late and don't make the plan early. Now, there are a million factors with this, right? He mentioned all those questions. To every one of those questions, it's not a one or two answer. Like there's a variety of different ways that facilities do different things and whatever. And I know a big piece of it is money, right? But we're having a conversation the other day, and Doug made a point of saying people underestimate how much it costs to stay in your home. You think that it's always cheaper, but then you start thinking about the care you need and whatever. But the other thing, and I'm not trying to tell people that you need to think of facility, but I'm saying, but that thing he said in the beginning is what I really want you to take away. There is a trade-off. Freedom, but burden. Or much less burden, but a restriction, right? Because if you're at home, every single medical thing that comes up, somebody has to deal with. Every single reality, somebody has to deal with. And if it's you, awesome. If it's your children and they're willing to do it at the level that they need to be done, cool. Or however, but that's the trade-off. So as you're considering these questions, all those factors, unfortunately, it's not a simple decision tree. Is this the case? Then yes, then no. There's a lot of factors involved. And learning about that stuff now will be a blessing to you and your family when there is something that may need to happen in the future. All right. Huh? So what?
Can I say one thing?
Yes. Come on, Katie.
Just to echo everything that's already been said, I've had a number of conversations as a priest with individuals who waited too long, and then they expressed that feeling of regret. So that is just something that it's never too early to think about. As Doug was saying, go ahead and do the research, know your options. What I recommend to people is go ahead and go visit, ask those questions, go see, talk with fellow residents. So it's never a wrong thing to do. And then if you ever need just another person to listen and help bounce ideas and think about, have I thought of all the questions, feel free to reach out to Doug, to Bob, to John, to us, because we're always willing to help ask those questions as you reflect and think about what you would like to do.
May I make one fast comment? If
Yes.
you want to die at home, and if you don't have hospice, then you need to either get your internist or general practitioner to agree to come to the house to sign the death certificate. If not, the police will come, which is not really what I would want, and I just share that with you. And if you died in a long-term care facility, they can sign the death certificate or in the hospital.
Yeah, that's another factor. In that big long list of factors, how somebody can sign a death certificate. All right, shifting gears. So let's recap. It's a good way to kind of get to what the whole point of this whole class is. We're all going to die. Everybody on board with that?
No.
Okay. All right, does everybody agree with the reality of that statement? But because of what we believe about eternal life and salvation, that is not the end. So therefore, we plan as people that are not facing the last of them, but towards a transition to a different life. And much of this planning is about how we want those last years to be for us, and how we want those we leave behind to be blessed by what we have done. Right? So we do what we do, both for ourselves. This is how I want it to go. These are my wishes. This is how I'd like it to be. Here's how I want my medical stuff to be handled. Here's how I want the will set up. Here's how I want everything done. I have power over these things. I make those decisions. I do that work. It's done. But also then, it is then a blessing. And I could tell you all more. I've told you like 6 stories of complicated situations after people have died. I could tell you more. We won't do that today. But we heard about planning your funeral. If you weren't there at that class, we have forms online you can grab, or we can hand you one, and we keep them on file here at the church. It is a huge blessing to the families. Again, let me say that over and over and over again. No child is ever frustrated when I say, here's what your parent wanted. They are so relieved that they don't have to try to figure out exactly what mom and dad want, or whoever, brother or whoever. We talked about, and then you also heard from Harper Morris on things you can do to prepare and what situations happen with the funeral. We then talked about medical power of attorney, end-of-life medical issues, and the need to have both a living will and a medical power of attorney so that both your people can make decisions for you when you cannot make them. Last week, we heard from 2 attorneys who basically, if you heard nothing else from what they said, you don't have to. You need to have a will. And your will needs to be updated when life situations change. Because the will, and I said last week, I know there are costs. If you can have a lawyer do it with you, do that. Because they know what they're doing. And they will make sure your wishes are what are done. And I can tell you a million bad stories about bad wills or no wills and what that does to families. So today, we're shifting a little bit. If we've done that work, if we know that we're going to die, Ash Wednesday, that's the whole point of Ash Wednesday, right? Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Katie and I will put that dust on 300 and some odd children at EDS on that day. And it's a weird feeling to go a cute little 5-year-old and take dust and smear on their forehead and say, remember, you're going to die. But we face, as Christians, we don't have to avoid the reality of death because for us it is not the end. But then, that should change the way we live. Right? Knowing this is what happens when we die reflects back into our life and changes the way we live. So, my question for you today. What would you want somebody to say about you at your funeral reception? Anybody want to share one? You don't have to. I mainly want you to make you think of it.
At the funeral or at the reception?
Either one. Either one. Either at the funeral or the reception. Bob?
Well, my wishes are that instead of the service, that the good news be proclaimed rather than Bob Gray's be proclaimed.
That's right. But Bob, if I happen to be in the pulpit, if I'm going to say the good news is proclaimed, this is the good news, and Bob proclaimed it his whole life, right?
Thank you, Michael. But as far as what happens afterwards, reception or whatever people need to do, but the service, I would like the love of God to be proclaimed.
Actually, Bob, you're making my point so well for me. Thank you, Bob, for saying that. Because here Bob is saying, I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about the good news of God's love, which says everything about who Bob is and how he's lived his life, right? My point is, what I once said about me, well, let's go others. I'm going to go back to Bob's point in a minute. Anybody else want to share something they once said? Doug.
He lived the way he died.
He lived the way he died. Yeah.
Died the way he lived.
All right. Anyone else?
I don't want any eulogy, but I do want to recognize that my highest honor is being on the vestry here at Christ Church and the vestry at St. Chris.
Okay?
I've written it down.
So here's some things I once said of mine. I want my kids to say I was a good father. Right? Let's say it was next week, I want my wife to say that I was the love of her life, right? And that if she marries somebody else, he'll pale in comparison to how awesome I was. I want my friends to say that I was always there for them. I want people to say I could tell a good story. And there was a time that a sermon meant something to them. I want people to say I was trustworthy, that I did the things I said I was going to do. But here's the kicker. If I want people to say about me when I die, that's the way I need to live. Right? Like, I don't get to hope my kids say I'm a good father. I get the opportunity to love them in this time that I am their dad, and earn it's not the right word, but you know what I mean, right? Like, we live in that way, and then that's what is said. There is a power in reflecting backwards, knowing that we go to our better, more full life, that we go from life to life, knowing that. Well, then the question is, how do we want people to remember us here? Well, then that is a direct relation to how we live while we're here. So we made the decision to call this class, it used to be called Dying Well. We made the decision to call this class Living and Dying Well because the two things are interwoven like that. And the reason I love Bob's example so much, and I'm not picking on you, Bob, but the reason I love Bob's example so much is the thing he once said is a reflection of his life, right? It's like, I don't want this to be about me. I want this to be about the love of God. And well, that's a good way to describe Bob Graves, right? So in other words, live the way you want to be remembered and die in your faith, knowing that we go into the world beyond. Okay, we have 20 minutes. Katie, do you want to do one of the passages? Or what do you want to do? Go on, jump in.
Well, I just want to say, hold on to that too, because life changes. And we say that in our death too. Life has changed but not ended. But as we change, we could change physically. You may experience limitations, and you may start to really question, well, what can I do now? Realizing I can't do what I used to do. And so reflecting on what you once said and who you are reminds you that you still have things that you can do. You still have purpose. You still have ways that you can live out God's love. And that will look different in different seasons of life. And so that's something just to remember, that as you go through life, you'll have different seasons and different abilities and different opportunities. So keeping your eyes open is easier when you remember how you want to live. So that was just what I would add.
Do you want to move to the next thing?
Can we actually jump to the end?
Yeah.
So one thing that we really want to ask, and then we'll get back to talking more about how does this impact how we live, is that we've done this class now twice. We did it back in the early January, February of 2019, and then now 5 years later. And so each time is a different iteration, different people that come and join, and different speakers. And we've had some repeats, but also some new. So what are things that you would like to hear next time we do it? If it is another 4 or 5 years. Is there anything we didn't cover that you wish we covered? Anything you wish we spent more time on?
I just want to be here.
You just want to be here? Okay, I
How long do you want to be here, Dan?
like that. Yes, Doug.
Some of the financial issues inherent in all of these issues.
True, all the financial realities that come with end of life and with planning. That's a good point. Maybe a little bit more on financial planning. Yes, Rita.
One of the things that I don't recall really much discussed was that, most people, their families scattered, their kids go wherever their careers take them or wherever, and we come to Florida and they all stay wherever. And if you're choosing out, like I got a skill facility for the future, and they're 7 states away, you're
That's true. Yeah, so what Rita was mentioning is that as you start to think of end of life, what the care looks like and what also where you're be living, what kind of community do you have, how far is family, and those kinds of decisions that come into play.
I'll throw mine in a second. Bob?
Recently in the paper, there was a terminology I'd never heard before, doulas.
Yeah.
And so maybe, some of this has been covered, but maybe a session that looks at the variety of ways both in the parish and otherwise of resources to bless this part of the journey.
Yeah. It's like part with along with the part on hospice, because the two are very much related, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Cheryl?
I was just thinking about the stuff you leave behind.
Uh-huh.
Working on your reputation, really, the sofa and,
Yeah.
your dishes and all that. So I was just thinking, I guess that goes in your will, but that's still something
So
that you need to.
We had thought about that. In fact, I got the number of somebody who actually helps people make those decisions, right? And simplify and downsize and long-term plan, and this is what it looks like, because it's kind of overwhelming. And so I thought maybe that person could have a good insight. I think something we could add to the class based on Doug's presentation, I think having a more extended time where we also explain all those different options, right? This is what nursing care looked like, this is what rehab looks like, this is what, all the phrases he said when he made the list. I think a conversation about that so that people kind of can be thinking about what may be long-term, whenever, if ever. I think some more conversation about that could be interesting. Anything else? Dan?
We did not get the law in the state of Florida. There's so many elderly people, and the reaction where certain family members take advantage of the elderly.
Yeah.
And there's some very, very strict guidelines and laws about that. I think that should be addressed.
Yeah, elder law would also be an interesting topic, right? Having somebody that's their focus. I think that would be fascinating. All
I
right.
held up on saying anything, but we had a terrible problem in Tennessee. I had 27 first cousins, and all of our favorite uncles was John Howard, my dad's brother, one of my dad's brothers. Everybody loved him. And he had a daughter that somehow got control of him and put him in a facility. It was an absolutely wonderful facility. It had a lot of money, but he couldn't get out. And we had to all go over there and sign in and call it in advance and get it out of a locked area. And he was as smart, as keen, and as alive as any human being anywhere. He knew everything. He read the newspaper every day. He watched the news come up on the court. He lived there for 12 years like that before several of us were sitting around one day and we just went to sleep. But he was alive that day too.
Yeah.
And we couldn't do a damn thing about it. And we had 26 against one person. And she controlled his life, and he had no say-so about it. And nobody would care. We went to the state, we went to the governor, we went everywhere to try to do it. You got to be careful about that.
Yeah, it goes back to the question that we heard Doug say, and also we heard the attorney say, and we heard the attorney say when we did medical attorney. You have to know the person, make clear it's clear who's in charge, and that you trust that person to do what you want, right? That it has to be a level of trust there, or you get a situation where they are acting in a way that is not what you would have wanted or your family would have wanted. Lucy, did you have your hand?
Yeah, it goes along with the financial part of it. I was going into a situation where one daughter was left with no decision making, and she was concerned about her mother living alone. And she said, I don't think she has enough money. And so I said, I don't know how to figure that out. But we went to an attorney, and it's a dice roll. You don't know whether you have enough money. You don't know how long you're going to live.
Right.
And so, I don't know how you do that.
Yeah, that goes back to, I think a financial planner talking about some of these things might be interesting from that perspective. It used to, it used to be that at least a large chunk of the population had pensions, right? And pensions would, a certain way, you just knew what it was going to be until you no longer needed it, right? And now it's not that like that. I mean, clergy have a pension, but besides that, there are not many of them anymore. Most of it's just hold away your money and hope you got the right number in there for when you need it, right? So that could be an interesting conversation too. Anyone else? Lee.
Yeah, I was just thinking maybe for the future.
That would be if we could consolidate. If the day that we did medical power of attorney and those issues, we had a speaker speak, and she had a wonderful list for what she called the red box. Did y'all see that? If you didn't get that, we can get you a copy of that. Basically, this is all the stuff you should have in the red box, but the good thing is to put it in the red box, you have to have done the work. Like, does that make sense? Like, it's not just like a bunch of stuff. Like, you have to go and do this and figure this out and put it in there, and then you got to figure this out and put it in there, like your will. And to Doug's point, that's one place you could have those documents that you want to make sure are easily found. I think that's why she has a red. I think the idea is the reason it's a big red box is you can find it. I think I told you all this story, but my dad they went on a couple-week trip into like Turkey and that area on a cruise ship. And so my dad was just doing what you do. He made sure I knew everything that I needed to know, and I'm the guy for all their stuff. I'm the person for all their stuff. And he goes, so just so you know, it's all in the box. And we hung up, and I realized I have no idea what he meant by the box. And I assumed in my head it was a P.O. box. Like, I just go to their bank and they'd have it. He goes, no, it's the box we put in the attic. And I'm like, how am I supposed to know there's a box in the attic? So then I had to go over and learn where the box in the attic was. My point, though, is that checklist, I think we could work with one of those lists like what she already has and think about what other things in our discussions are part of it and include it in a sort of consolidated thing. Anyone else?
Sure.
Yeah.
My point was very similar to his in that if there was a logic tree, where do I interact? What do I have?
Yeah.
And if I have a logic tree, I know what I'm missing or not.
Yeah.
So that box gets filled with everything that's needed.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
Engineers, you gotta figure.
Yeah.
Landlord,
Yeah.
okay, move on, got it.
Yeah. Cool. That's a good idea. We'll work on that as a.
Sorry.
Oh no.
It's gonna be difficult.
No. Love engineers. Yes.
I know that probably we need to go do some of this research ourselves, but it would be so nice to even have a brief description of the different nursing homes and Azalea Trace like places in our area.
Yeah.
And the pros and cons. That would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think that is part of that expanded thing. I don't want to talk about particulars only because I don't want to. I think we could talk about them in general terms.
Right, not.
But I think, like if you're looking for this type of care, here are some examples that do that kind of thing and whatever. I think that could be helpful because they're radically, as Doug said, they're radically different. Like one of the blessings of Azalea Trace or a place like that is they have different levels of care. So you just bounce around the same facility depending on what your needs are, right? And one blessing of that is if two people are married and they have different needs, they can get those needs met in a way that does not. Can I be real for a second? You two online, whoever watches this, be real for a second. One of the things I worry about is when one person in a marriage really starts to struggle and the other person becomes a prisoner of their own house. Right? And I'm not using any names, but then I'm like, sometimes I know they love that person, they're going to do what's right. I know that, right? But there's a certain point where they can't do the stuff that feeds them. Like even as simple as come to church, right? I say that, and I'm not saying therefore you need this kind of care. I'm saying those are some of the issues. Like sometimes we don't even think about what if the two people have different needs? What's that going to look like? And so there are places like that, and there are places that are short-term, there are places that are long-term, there are all kinds of different stuff. Maybe that'd be a good discussion to have so people see different options.
In long-term care, there's a problem of whether the married couple want to stay together or need to be separated. And a lot of times that has not been decided. And even if it's decided, things change. But that is a common problem.
So my grandparents were at Homestead, which is way up there, by, past 9 Mile towards the interstate, and simple place, but they were really nice people there. And this isn't a commercial for them, an endorsement. They may be horrible. Who knows? We had a good experience. But the reason we chose that is my grandmother had terrible breathing problems, and she needed help with, like, she was on a thing that would shake her chest or breathing treatments almost all day long. My grandfather had very severe dementia. 2 different needs, right? Where my grandfather needed to be, my grandmother would have been, she was brilliant. My grandmother was brilliant. Would have bored her to tears. And so they got to be in 2 different buildings that were like a 2-minute walk apart, right? So my grandmother every day would check on them 3 or 4 times a day, right? And they could continue to be a loving married couple, but we found a place that they could kind of both do that. So I say that there's a lot of different options and different kind of places that do different kinds of things to find the needs, but that sort of exploration of that might be helpful. All right. So I'm going to wrap it up in a minute because Katie and I need to go get ready for church and all of that. A lot we did not cover. You have a handout. There's some really great readings in there. You can check them out on your own. Talk about our theology of death. I do want to end with this, though. One of the things I get asked a lot about in the process of death is the nature of salvation. I will be talking to somebody who is worried about their niece and her faith and what's going to happen to her when she dies. Right? One, I want you all to have confidence that your salvation is secured. I also want you to know that I think it is very good biblical theology to believe there are options and opportunities for all people. I like to remind people that the only person that we know in the New Testament who gets into heaven is the crook on the side of Jesus. Y'all remember that story? I use this all the time. One crook starts giving Jesus a hard time. The other crook says, "Stop it." And then he says, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." That's all he says. He doesn't do a particular prayer. He doesn't get baptized. He doesn't start going to church. He doesn't tithe. He doesn't do any of those things. He just said, "Help me." And Jesus says, you know what he says? "Today you will be with me in paradise." Right? That is my hope for all people. And I don't believe, and I have good biblical reasons for believing this too, that this human life is the last time that Jesus is there looking for you to ask him for help. Does that make sense? So I don't believe, so let's say somebody died hating the idea of religion and talked bad about God every day. It may look real different though when you go and you're in the world to come and there is an invitation to come into the kingdom. So my favorite metaphor for this is, because y'all know I love C.S. Lewis, is the last battle is the last of the Chronicles of Narnia series. And there's a good army and a bad army, just like Revelation. It's trying to play out Revelation, and the bad army loses because God wins in the end. And then what happens is it says the bad army in old Narnia, the world is destroyed. It just fades away. And there's a new world. And there's a gate that goes into the new world. And Aslan, who is the Jesus figure, is standing at the gate, screaming to the army that is walking out of just losing. The ones who just fought him, the ones who had rebelled against him, the ones who had done all the horrible stuff. And he's screaming to them, "Come in, come in, come in, come in." And many of them saw him, realized they were wrong, and walked in. Now it does say that some didn't. because they were so used to the darkness that they couldn't see the light. And they just kept walking into the darkness, and leaves you unsure what that looks like. I believe that even in the darkness, he's still screaming, come in, come in, come in, come in, come in. And there's an eternal invitation into the saving work of Jesus. That's what I believe. Right? It's my theology. Yes, Dick?
Is secure salvation, has that always been a tenet of our Episcopal Church? I seem to hear it more and more in recent years.
Secure salvation, I think what I mean by that is expression. I think what the other people are saying too is there is a form of Christianity that builds the faith around people's insecurities about their eternal salvation. Turn or burn, do this or burn, believe this or burn, do this or burn. Everybody hear me say I love the Catholics, and I'm talking about the one form of Catholicism, not all Catholicism. Everybody hear that? There's this idea that you got to do things right, or you end up in venial sins. A concern about salvation. Our belief is, by the acceptance of faith in Jesus, our salvation is secured. In that, there's no more we got to do. That's why that phrase may be used more. You got a question?
I don't want to keep down that.
All right. I love rabbit holes, though, and Katie's telling me it's about time to go, but I love rabbit holes.
So if you are baptized, then you've got young adult children, viewers, all of this. Are they
Baptism is automatically get in. Let's start there. Some believe that. I mean, in the Middle Ages, there are all these stories that when a baby would be born sick, they would literally run them to the church, or the nurses would do emergency baptisms because they were worried that baby would go to hell. Everybody here, that's ridiculous? Everybody with me? Ridiculous that we are worried about the salvation of a baby that dies. Ridiculous. But what baptism is the acceptance of the love of God that is our salvation. So I don't believe you have to be baptized to get in. The crook on the right side of Jesus wasn't baptized, right? Baptism is a mark of that faith. So let's talk about rebellious people. I believe that offer and that gift is there still for all people. And I believe what it's going to be like, so this is what I think happens. I think we all go and encounter God. And we realize all the ways we are wrong, including this guy. I'm going to get there and be like, oh, that's what you meant. I shouldn't have preached that sermon. And I'm going to realize all that stuff. And that is the moment of repentance where we realize, oh my gosh, I now see things the way it is. And then with that knowledge, there's then the invitation. So I get, for example, people, we got into some serious stuff. If I need to, I'll leave in 2 seconds. 2 seconds? Katie's giving me the look. So what do we believe about people who commit suicide? Right? Let's say they were anti-religion, anti-God, it's all bunk, and then they get depressed and they die. And there are people that then are worried, well, does that mean? And there are churches that believe that, right? Let's be honest. And I'm like, you're wrong, those churches. People who get to that place are sick, right? They have a mental illness. Their brain is doing something to make them see the world the way this not really is. And God does not punish the sick. That's ridiculous, right? I believe that person wakes up in a new reality and sees the world not the way they thought when they made that horrible decision, but instead see the way that the world is, and that they are not the person that had no worth, but actually the beloved child of God. And in that moment, there is both grief that they were wrong and joy that now they are loved. And I think that's true of all people, regardless of what their situation is in this life. So it's not so much the baptism, but I think it's still that option. So what we hope in the baptism is it's prepared people for the reality. It'll make it easier for them to see that moment and accept that salvation. Bob?
I like the parable of the good shepherd who goes out to the lost sheep
That's right.
until he finds
That's right.
not a certain length of time. In Romans 8, nothing can separate us from the love of God. And
flipped over her whole house until she found the coin. Didn't say she worked at it and then she got tired and gave up on the coin. She did whatever she needed to do to find that coin. That shepherd did whatever he needed to do to find that sheep. That is my vision of the saving power of God. Relentless in his pursuit of his children. I wanted to end on that because you all, I hope you have faith and assurance in your salvation. Right? Turn to the God who loves you. That's what I tell people when I'm in hospital rooms. Turn to the God who loves you. And if you're worried about other people, I hope they come to faith too. But I also know that that offer is out there for all people. And we have faith in a God who saves. Okay. On that note, thank you for being a part of this class. Next week we start small groups, so everything's a little bit different. I now need to run very fast and get vested. Love you.